Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this behind the curtain conversation between DJ Spooky and DJ Flash Gordon Parks. My name is Claire Williamson, and I'm the Director of Education and Community Engagement at Society for the Performing Arts. Before we delve into this conversation, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the many Indigenous communities that have long used and continue to use this land as a living and gathering space. SPA's offices in Jones Hall are located on ancestral land traversed by the Karankawa, the Atakapa Ishak, and the Coahuitecan people. The Alabama Coushatta people migrated to the Houston area over 3 centuries ago, and they have played a large role in shaping the culture and economy of our region. We acknowledge these communities to offer recognition and respect for their lived experience and to broaden awareness of the forces that have led to this moment. I am honored to be sharing space this evening with Erika Thompson of the African American Library at the Gregory School. Housed in the first public school for African Americans in Houston, the African American Library at the Gregory School is a special collections library operated by Houston Public Library. And it provides an incomparable range of resources to the community, from research materials to community programs addressing the history and needs of Houston's Fourth Ward. It is a truly one-of-a-kind organization, and we're proud to be partnering with you all on a program like this. Welcome, Erika.
Thank you, Claire, and good evening, everyone. On behalf of the African American Library at the Gregory School, the Houston Metropolitan Research Center, and the Houston Public Library System, I just want to thank the Society for the Performing Arts for inviting us to participate in this amazing event. We too are so grateful for our community partners like SPA that allow us to expand our understanding of the arts and challenge our interpretive boundaries in uniquely exciting and unexpected ways. I want to personally thank you, Claire, for all of your tremendous effort and hard work in making tonight's program possible. And you always are so supportive of the work that we do here at the Gregory School. And for that, we are extremely grateful. For those joining us this evening who are interested in learning more about the work that we do at the Gregory School, do please visit our website, www.thegregoryschool.org. When Claire came to us with the opportunity to be in conversation with DJ Spooky, I immediately thought of the Gregory School's dear friend, whom I have the honor of introducing to you all this evening. Jason Woods, also known as DJ Flash Gordon Parks, is an ethnomusicologist from Houston, Texas. He earned a bachelor's degree in photography at Sam Houston State University in 2001. In 2005, Flash Gordon Parks published a book of photography and poetry called The Beautiful Side of Ugly with Eric Blaylock. The Beautiful Side of Ugly combined the poetic words of Blaylock with the striking images of Parks to document the beauty of the urban areas of Houston. Jason has also maintained several DJ residencies, which range from blues to jazz to soul funk to hip hop. As a DJ, Flash Gordon Parks strives to educate the audience through carefully thought out selections. He often collects, documents, and lectures on the importance of Houston's rich music history. He has lectured at such institutions as Contemporary Arts Museum Houston, Rice University, Art League Houston, and many others. In 2015, Flash Gordon Parks directed the documentary This Thing We Do, Houston DJ Culture Revealed, which is an introduction to the world of DJing in the city of Houston. In 2019, he directed the documentary Archie Bell, celebrating the achievements of Bell, also known as soul music icon Mr. Tighten Up. His most notable events include Motown on Mondays and A Fistful of Soul. Thank you so much, Jason, for joining us this evening. And now, Claire, I turn it back to you and tonight's special guest.
Thank you, Erika. It is now my pleasure to introduce Paul Miller, aka DJ Spooky. Paul D. Miller, aka DJ Spooky, is a composer, multimedia artist, and writer whose work immerses audiences in a blend of genres, global culture, and environmental and social issues. Miller has collaborated with an array of recording artists, and his 2018 album, DJ Spooky Presents Phantom Dance Hall, debuted at #3 on Billboard Reggae. His large-scale multimedia performance pieces include Rebirth of a Nation, Terra Nova Sinfonia Antarctica, commissioned by the Brooklyn Academy of Music, and Soul Counterpoint, written during his 2014 residency at Seoul Institute of the Arts. His multimedia project Sonic Web premiered at San Francisco's Internet Archive in 2019. In 2014, he was named National Geographic Emerging Explorer. He produced Pioneers of African American Cinema, a collection of the earliest films made by African American directors, which was released in 2015. Miller's artwork has appeared in the Whitney Biennial, the Venice Biennial for Architecture, the Miami Art Basel Fair, and many other museums and galleries. His books include the award-winning Rhythm Science, Sound Unbound, an anthology about digital music and media, The Book of Ice, a visual and acoustic portrait of the Antarctic, and The Imaginary App on how apps changed the world. His writing has been published by The Village Voice, The Source, and Art Forum, and he was the first founding executive editor of Origin magazine. DJ Spooky's film project Rebirth of a Nation is presented by SPA on February 6, 2021. Welcome, DJ Spooky and DJ Flash.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Yeah, hey everybody.
Well, I'm really excited to be hearing from both of you this evening, and we'll let you both sort of lead the conversation where it takes. But I'd love to start things off by just asking Paul to tell us a little bit more about Rebirth of a Nation to get our audiences primed for this conversation.
Okay, well, there's one or two foundational issues that I think are really, really important to realize right now. And one, this film, Birth of a Nation, the original version, is a KKK propaganda film. I just want to assure everyone out there I'm not a KKK member. So just getting that out of the way. And then on the other end of the spectrum, how we think about cinema has radically evolved over the last 100 years. And here we are streaming. Every word we're saying is data that's being sent through server farms, globally, satellites, you name it. And during the pandemic, everyone has pivoted to a lot more of a deep structural relationship to bits and bytes as they watch video at home or under quarantine. So cinema has radically entered people's lives in a much more powerful way during the pandemic era. So these are all things that sort of linger over the conversation: the power of film to make us reimagine what is possible, and above all, the way that racial politics is evolving because of platforms. People are really being bombarded with misinformation, you name it. And of course, I'm from Washington, D.C., and I grew up several blocks from where the Capitol was. So the Battle of Capitol Hill, one could argue, was a platform war. Democracy itself is a platform at this point. So these are issues that I think, just kind of want to riff on. So when you ask me to talk about film isn't just film. It's a reflection of society's visions. It's a reflection of the tools and technologies that make storytelling possible. So as a DJ, the idea for me was to remix it. And that's the idea is director as DJ. So that's kind of what I'm riffing on at this point.
So I'm curious, Paul. You've been known to compose and create different sounds, different types of music. As an ethnomusicologist, I want to know a little bit more about the music component for the film. You reached out to a quartet, is that correct, to create the music for the film, and then you sampled what they recorded and then bounced back and forth. Is that the process of making the music for the film?
Yeah, and Flash, thanks for your question. It's a real pleasure to see the wall behind you of all vinyl. And several of those records happen to be records I've made. So thank you.
Absolutely.
So let's unpack what you're saying. I'm a composer who does beats, but I'm also a composer who writes classical music. Mm-hmm. So Kronos Quartet is one of the most premier, generally people tend to think of them as the top premier ensemble in the country. And I've had them play some of my film soundtrack work. I've also worked with Henry Louis Gates at Harvard, I did music for his PBS series on the history of African Americans in America and so on. So I'm a fan of trying to figure out how can the notion of DJing be applied to film. And of course, film soundtracks are a critical component to that. Now, there's a lot to be said if you go back to like early films that use DJ culture as the basic premise, like Wild Style, for example, was a classic with Fab Five Freddy and all sorts of folks. Or there was another film called Warriors, which is set in New York in the late 70s. New York was falling apart, so people were just setting up crazy sound systems, you know. And so sound systems come out of the whole Jamaican kind of situation. And I used to go to Jamaica when I was a child. My uncle on my mother's side, or god uncle, you know, everybody's got god cousin, or this, that, you know, extended family in Jamaica. So I used to go to Kingston every summer, and we would visit with that side of our kind of extended, kind of, you know, family stuff. And I noticed that they always had more bass. Like everything was just.
Yeah.
Although you all in Texas, your music has a tremendous amount of bass too.
Absolutely.
I think if you go to Kingston, the Jamaicans might have something to say about that. You know, they have. So, you know, I grew up around a household that both parents were professors, and my father was dean of Howard University's law school. In fact, Kamala Harris, of course, studied there, or our current first woman vice president. So these are things, you know, both parents were always like, the world can be better. We got to rethink this and make things happen. My mother was a historian of design. So when you say in music, I come out of a household where people, you know, our dinner conversation would be like, oh, you know, Reagan is a nightmare. How do we get Reaganomics out of this? And, you know, we'd be talking about economics, being a stakeholder in a progressive American narrative. And we also had, you know, a lot of artists coming through our house, poets, creatives. We'd always have dinners, you know, it was just like a hub. Like my mom was always doing stuff. And I grew up around that. And we'd have, you know, and my dad was Angela Davis's lawyer for, there was a group of lawyers representing her work. And these are all things that, you know, just linger when you're a child. You see, oh, this woman who has this crazy afro, you know, she's, she just happens to be going, you know, like, you know, Black Power, you know, kind of, you know, these just kind of like, okay, that's cool. That's cool. And here we are decades later, and we still need these messages. So film, music, they really changed the way we think about society. I mean, Netflix of the mind, you know, at this point, it's really, the pandemic is, I've never seen people watching so many movies at this point. Everybody's watching like everything, you know, the 5th episode of, you know, Beverly Hills, you know, God knows, Will Smith, you know, rerun or whatever. Like people are just, there's not enough media to go around at this point because everybody's been at home so long.
Right.
So, you know, yeah, sorry to riff on that, but just, you know,
No.
Yeah.
No, I mean, you bring up some interesting points. Also, you bring up the pandemic, and you mentioned the movie Warriors, talking about how people felt New York was falling apart at the time. And one of the solutions during that time was to bring people together through music, or, you know, that's when the sound system culture really blossomed here in America. So I'm curious, like, how do we sort of transform things here in a pandemic, you know, using art, using music, using film, and whatever else, writing, you know, how do we sort of, you know, exemplify, you know, positivity or, you know, unity, you know, at this stage in this current climate?
You know, I mean, it's a real paradox because, okay, let me just break down the film a little bit because I want to tie that and keep tying it. And Erika, you might have something to say about this too, but thinking about the archive. So here we are, where as African Americans, our archive became oral culture and oral tradition, because so much of the languages and rhythms of when we came over from West Africa were erased by the slave experience. And the fragments that we were able to reclaim, we repurposed and remixed hymns like gospel, you know, slave songs actually appropriated from the, you know, the Southern sort of Pentecostal and Baptist and other kinds of quirky religious traditions that the English had brought over. And then the people tend to forget a lot of the slave owners in the South were Scottish. And so that's why when you see, same with Jamaica as well, the banking system and the slave holders were Scottish. That's why when you see the quote unquote, the battle flag of the Confederacy, which is not, it's actually the wrong flag. You see the X, that's the cross of St. Andrew, which was this, if you look at the flag of Scotland, it's just a blue X and the white background. Same with the Jamaican flag. If you actually see the red, gold, the green, gold, and black, they have the cross of St. Andrew as well. So, even Bob Marley was half Scottish. Actually, people tend to forget he was mixed race, and his father was Scottish. So everything is complicated. Nothing is separate. Everybody in America likes to think that there's a category for race or this or that, and the complexity of how connected we are and how interconnected we are. That's what this film. There was a fear, like the idea, the fiction of whites being pure. There was a situation that drove a lot of the film. Meanwhile, if you go back to Europe, look at the 17th and 18th century, man. These people were murdering, killing. You had the 30 Years' War, you had the 100 Years' War. The British hated the French couldn't stand the Germans. And when they come over here, they're white. So the idea of creating whiteness. If you were back in the day, they'd be like, yo, man, I'm Scottish. I can't stand those English, the English. I'm sure you've seen Braveheart, the film. So everybody had issues and beefs. The Germans couldn't stand the French hated the English. And even in their own cultures, you had, people getting killed because they were Huguenots or Protestant versus Catholic. So this film was kind of a way for the construction of whiteness to be a national narrative so that everybody could say, okay, we're here now, we're in America, let's everybody take a deep breath, and we're going to make this new crazy thing called whiteness. And then next thing you know, you get like Marjorie Taylor Greene running around with QAnon. Just fast forward and it's the same thing. I'm sure you've seen this congresswoman running around talking about like Jews in space with lasers and stuff.
Right.
I couldn't make this stuff up. It's just totally over the top. But these are fictions within fictions that people then begin to believe, right? So America's racial stuff is fictional. I personally think everybody is complicated. We're all complicated. So I celebrate that. And I think this film, by remixing it and pulling it apart and sort of interrogating it, it gives people a sense that, okay, let's use some critical thinking here. We're going to put on a critical thinking cap and use music and composition to kind of deconstruct some of the processes and fictions that were used to create whiteness, which actually a lot of people will say is actually a lot of legacies of toxic masculinity, the system of rape culture. If you look at what happened with Sally Jesse Hemings, of course, Thomas Jefferson, he had mixed race children. There's, of course, I'm sure everybody's heard and seen Hamilton. Nothing is like pure driven snow here. America's a mess. It's always been messy. Democracy is messy.
Right.
And that's what makes it actually a unique thing. I've been to China. These are much older civilizations where if you have the emperor, you cross the emperor, whatever, you're dead. They will just, wipe you out. And I think that's where I cherish democracy right now, because Americans don't even know. I've been to many other cultures and countries, and we have something very unique. We're a multiracial nation, and we are multicultural in a fundamental way that actually is life affirming. Many other cultures would have been at war and murderous. People tend to forget how many wars the Europeans had amongst themselves. Like whatever group. They'd just be killing people. Europe was murderous for centuries.
Right.
So this is a reflection of that. And this film is quite vicious. If you start thinking about the impact of its critique of everything, it's wild to even look at it now and you're like, like Kamala Harris is mixed race. Obama was mixed race. And that would be, these people's brains would be melting just because they can't process the complexity.
Right.
Anyway, hopefully that answers the question.
Oh, definitely. I want to, you said so many interesting things within that, but I'm curious because Birth of a Nation, the original film, is well over 100 years old at this point. And I'm curious to know to your thoughts of how a current audience would treat such material that has, such, a long shelf life, or because at the time the film was considered a great forward moment in cinema and all of these things, like introducing, several things that hadn't been done before. And so it's celebrated for that even still to this day. But how would a young audience, would you imagine, connect with a film like this, even it being remixed with modern music, if you will?
Yeah, I mean, when I worked with Kronos Quartet and had them play the string elements and then mixed it with blues, then mixed it with electronics and mixed it with hip hop, that was like a triple remix. It's kind of a mashup of all these different traditions.
Mm-hmm.
But your average person now would see the political tension in the film. For example, the fear of the whites in the South was that you'd have a mixed race guy running the town. And as a matter of fact, if you look at what happened later on with Greenwood, where it was called the Black Wall Street.
Mm-hmm. In Tulsa.
Yeah, the whites went in and burned it down because anytime Black people were beginning to advance and have their own economic position, funny thing is, it wasn't a threat because everybody just wanted to do business and just live their life.
Mm-hmm.
But the whites couldn't process that, and their brain was melting. They would rather go and burn and murder and kill everybody. Meanwhile, Killer Mike is making a bank now called, it's going to be the first hip hop bank, which is interesting. I'm curious to see what happens with that. He's doing the Greenwood Bank. I don't know if you heard about this one. It's very interesting to see a hip hop MC getting all this financial stuff happening, and he's going to be the first. It's going to be a Black owned bank, and he's setting it up now. You'll probably start hearing about it by the end of the year. But to go to the heart of what you were saying, a lot of this stuff is both economic and psychological. And to me, at least, when I look at Marjorie Taylor Greene, and she's this blonde woman from Georgia running around, I don't know if there's an infamous video where she goes to pursue David Hogg, who was one of the survivors of the Parkland school shootings. And she had said that the shootings didn't happen and that the kids were actors. And it's gotten zillions of hits on whatever channel you've seen, YouTube and so on. And everything she's saying is delusional. Like, she's just like, and the QAnon stuff is algorithm based. A lot of it, they don't know who made it. It's just this ideology, and it's anti-Semitic, it's racist, it's lunacy. But how these people get these ideas, it's through social media. And the social media of that beginning of the 20th century was film. So racial politics got played into film. And in fact, the recruitment of KKK went through the roof when Birth of a Nation started playing around. Mm-hmm. And so there were riots, there were protests. So your average person now would be like, okay, I got it. I can see the riots, the protests.
Right.
And the mixed race character who becomes the controller, of the town, that could be Obama. I mean, you could easily just put tremendous amount of our current stuff. There's the woman who's she's a servant of the senator, and she ends up being a lover, and mm-hmm. Everybody is like sexualized and wild stuff is happening, but it's only the Black people who are sexual. The white people are very prim and proper, which of course we can easily look at Thomas Jefferson and or various other people. They were raping Black women. I'm sorry to use such a, but it was systematic, brutal stuff going on in the plantations. And there were artists like Kara Walker, who's a brilliant artist. She does these sort of silhouette paintings that look, just crazy, sexualized, weird stuff. So the myth of this notion of purity, the myth of hybridity, and the reason I'm saying those two is that, Flash, to go to the heart of what you're saying, is like most of that's still going on because of the legacy that people never owned what they did. Like the Germans in World War II, they had what you call, the same thing happened in South Africa, called Truth and Reconciliation, where after World War II, the Germans, they said, okay, we murdered like mad amount of people. We're sorry. We are never going to, but if you look at the way history is taught in Germany, they acknowledge it, they own it. They're like, yeah, we did some crazy stuff. South Africa, they're like, yeah, we murdered, we did, slave, crazy apartheid. America's like, what? They just kind of skip out.
Right.
And by repressing that memory, it makes it more powerful and weirder. And so it just, I think I'm looking at this film as kind of a truth and reconciliation kind of, kind of interrogation of history. And hopefully it just gets people to rethink some of these myths and ideologies that drive their quirky thinking about stuff. No,
Right.
it's an artist. It's an art project.
Of course. Now, Paul, I mean, you've done a lot of interesting things, or had interesting approaches to sort of age-old questions. Here you are remixing, as far as music is concerned, but then you're also adding technology into it, developing apps or just ways that people access information now. How important do you think it is to tie in all these things? Like, you have a movie that's over 100 years old. The actual process of you making the music is a newer sort of concept, or you're challenging yourself from what it appears to be to stretch the possibilities of where the music can go. How important do you think, as an artist, is it to tie in historical things, analog approaches versus digital approaches, and how does all of that fit in to convey a message in 2020, 2021?
It's a crazy moment. Sorry to keep saying everything's crazy, but it is a crazy time. I mean, the Battle of Capitol, I'm sure, you saw the guy with the horns and the painted face, and he's sitting on the president's desk.
It's surreal.
Right. But that could have been a scene in Birth of a Nation where they had the black people in the Congress, and the guy puts his foot up on the table and he's eating fried chicken and just like.
Right. Yeah.
So the film is definitely an ideological sort of deconstruction, and to go to the heart again. I sorry to keep using that phrase, but I tend to think in this sort of non-linear, pointillistic cloud of information. So that's kind of my thought process. But the problem with America is non-self-reflection. Like, people, I think, really could use some better tools for self-reflection. And film, music, these are all tools that people can hear the society, the story of where they're coming from, in a healthier and more dynamic way than just going out and like joining some militia or joining some crazy, cult like QAnon or something. So I think what you're talking about is how do societies evolve? Because like right now we're in a holding pattern. I just think that something needs to break. Not saying break like as in political revolution, like or an attempted dumbass revolution like what they tried to do on January 6th. But the Republicans, as soon as the elections just happened, the first thing they did, which again, this is a scene straight out of the movie, is they're making new rules to make it harder to vote. They're going straight to that. And in fact, as soon as Georgia, I mean, I was so glad to see Stacey Abrams flip Georgia. I mean, I was like, man. So they're like, we can't have that. We got to make it more difficult to vote. You have to go to the moon, circle around the moon 5 times.
Right.
Get your driver's license on Saturn, and make sure your spaceship arrives back in time for like the election. I can't believe these people. I mean, that's where the health of a society, I think, can be measured in the reflections of people's narrative and storytelling. And I think the ancient Greeks, if you look at any myth or don't forget, like these were all poems: Odyssey, Iliad, the Trojan War. We do film now, and that's kind of the way we do our storytelling. So it's still, everything is in formation. I mean, literally, I wouldn't say anything's cast in stone. And the way I felt, and again, I'd be happy to hear you guys' thoughts on this. I felt the day before the election coming up in November, I couldn't even sleep, man. I was like, if Trump gets another 4 years, it's just the thing is like, but then you fast forward to 1/6, the Battle of Capitol Hill. And these people felt like the election was rigged and flawed. And I'm like, it's just very interesting to see the way that if you were an African-American voting in the South and your vote had been, God knows what these guys would do with the vote, because we can talk, that's a whole different conversation. But just even getting a tiny taste of that, these people were flipping out. And the thing is that it was fictional. So if it had been real, you know, I actually think I truly thought the Trump people were going to just do some crazy stuff on the night of the election. And I couldn't sleep. And I was just like, oh man, please God, not another 4 years of this lunatic. And the most refreshing thing that's happened to me in the last several months of just dealing with, and I'm in New York now, but I'm normally in Colorado at the moment, was when they deplatformed Trump and they took his Twitter away. And I was like, oh, I never want to see or hear about this guy again. And that idea of deplatforming, that was segregation. Like you got put out of a situation. But I'm talking about a historical, not within the range of what he's feeling. Like again, the Marjorie Taylor woman's walking around saying censored, like she's wearing this little mask, this stupid mask. I'm a big fan of Cori Bush, for example, who was elected recently. And, you know, I'm a fan of anybody that says America can be better. I don't mind if white, black, Indian, as long as we can at least as Americans dialogue. And that's half the battle is right now. This film, I actually think is more current than ever because people are in this ideological, you can't reason with them. That's the problem right now. It's like, how do you, if somebody said the sky is purple and my vote is on Saturn, like, you're like, okay, I think you need some mental health checks there, man. You know, like,
right.
Definitely.
Well, one more thing I want to just bring up before, if Claire and Erica have something to chime in with. So, I mean, in this current time, we've seen things like Lovecraft Country, which, you know, digs back to, you know, all source material that's rooted in racism and put a new twist on the story, you know, focusing on the horror genre. Now, watching Rebirth of a Nation, you know, of course, I've seen the original, but it felt like a horror film. And then there's moments in your composition which sorts of scores it like a horror film. And I wanted to know, was that intentional in certain moments? You know, did you try to convey that, you know, that message in, you know, to show that this is scary on so many levels?
I mean, it's interesting that Jordan Peele, he's one of my favorite filmmakers, and this film, Get Out, Us, the idea of black horror is a huge thing right now. And he's been able to kind of put that idea of black surrealism in the context of a mythical, poetic sense of horror. There's also The Watchmen, which was pretty brilliant. And all those films are wildly popular, whatever platform they're on, Netflix, HBO, and so on. And of course, even if you go back to The Matrix, the film The Matrix by the Wachowski brothers, actually now sisters, they both had sex change. Again, remix, you know, the two.
Wow.
No, it's official. You know, some people say he, him. I'm a he, him. They're they, her. I believe they've changed their, you know, it's a remix. Everybody's good, you know. And the way that Morpheus in The Matrix, you know, he offers the red pill, blue pill. I'm sure you remember that. You know, that was a classic moment. All of those are about sort of dream analytics. So, I mean, I'd say that the Lovecraft Country, The Watchmen, all of those represent a place where African American culture and the sort of waking nightmare of being in an American context is really come home to roost in a cinematic form. And that still goes back to Birth of a Nation too. I mean, it's really. It's a powerful thing because, like, the Oracle in The Matrix was mixed race, and there was a power. The Matrix, the first one, was one of my favorite films. But also, I love what Boots Riley did with this film. Sorry to Bother You. And there's a whole new system right now where I just wrote an article for Rotten Tomatoes, which is the website rating films, about the history of what they called race films. And one of the most powerful films was Zora Neale Hurston just recording everyday life. And you realize just the power and dignity of that. And then to the edge of that, you just feel like this is America. Something could go wrong, go sideways in any direction. So these are all things that linger over the conversation. Anything, I mean, if you're African American, somebody could just, I'll give you an example. I'm sure you heard about Eric Garner. Breonna Taylor, you
Yes.
know, you're asleep in your room and bullets start flying and you're dead. Or you're driving a car and a cop pulls you over because they saw a turn signal. You're dead. Or if you're a kid playing in a playing ground and somebody sees you have a little orange gun, which the cops come and kill the
Right.
kid. So that's the contemporary horror. And it's
Definitely.
also a contemporary sense of radical anxiety about everyday life. And I think that's what these films kind of reflect. The kind of, again, horror movies have always been about the displacement of everyday life and sort of what you call projection. Um,
Right.
so these are things that, just you could be dead anytime. But then again, you know what? It's America. And, the war on terror. I'll give you a funny example. Man, every time I fly, well, I miss travel right now, but you have to take your shoes off because this dude tried to blow up an airplane with his shoes 20 years ago.
Hmm.
Or, I'm sorry, there's one guy that tried to blow up an airplane with his underwear. And thank God we don't have to take your underwear off to get on a flight now. But, every time you take your shoes off when you get on the flight, it's just because there's one dude, 20 years ago.
Hmm.
So we get stuck. And America, you would think it's more dynamic. We are dynamic, but how we rethink these issues of like creativity, evolution of society, and above all, being dynamic, somebody has to push the envelope. And that's where I think DJ culture, people being able to remix, appropriate. If you look at any of the young Black artists right now, Black art's very popular, very trendy right now. They're
Hmm.
all, many of them are just on Instagram. There's Afrofuturism. People are doing crazy stuff.
Right.
And I think that that's a healthy, response to this mechanism, like you were saying, of contemporary horror. But yeah,
Right.
I mean, even just recently, man, I tell you, that 1-6, even downtown DC looks like Baghdad. I mean, there's the green zone. They even call it the green zone.
Right.
Yeah, in Baghdad, they had the green zone. And but
Mhm.
that's a whole different conversation. But yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Really, some really profound thoughts there, and definitely fascinating connections between our contemporary world and the world of D.W. Griffith for sure. Thank you so much to DJ Flash and Paul for your comments. Erika, do you have anything you want to add? Any questions for Paul that we may have missed, or comments that you want to share, reflections?
Not really. The only thing that I am kind of curious about, and Claire and I sort of talked a little bit about this earlier in our kind of screening conversation, was I'm just curious of when you were actually introduced to the original Birth of a Nation, because for me, I was telling Claire, I wasn't aware of the film until I think I was a junior in college. And, I know for us here at the Gregory School, some of our patrons are younger. We make assumptions of cultural references that they don't necessarily have. We have a record, you'll appreciate this, a record from Peacock Records in one of our galleries, one of the early record companies in the city, and students come in and they ask what it is. There's just these kind of, as things go on and things change, huge gaps of kind of understanding. And so I wonder when did Birth of a Nation come onto your radar? And did you understand it for all of the complexities at that time that then made, this project something that you felt like you wanted to take on?
Yeah, I mean, both my parents were professors. So my mom was a historian of design, and my father was dean of Howard University's law school. So we, it was both parents professors. Conversation was at that kind of professor level. So we always were dealing with history and art and progressive politics, human rights. And we growing up in Washington D.C. In the late '70s, early '80s. You were also presented with the fact that it was a city where the murder rate was huge. There was a crack epidemic, but DC had black police, So you felt like, wow, they would really go upside your head if if you did anything.
Yeah.
Yeah, I grew up in a middle class area. I'm a nerd. So I always was playing stuff like Dungeons and Dragons. I was doing like geeky stuff. I was into quantum physics, and I've read science fiction books. So, the Birth of a Nation project, I think one of my earliest memories of it was seeing it at a bookstore, because there were some really cool used bookstores in my neighborhood. And if I recall correctly, this is like, I don't even know, the mid 80s, late 80s. So it's a quick minute. But, and it's just stuff like that where you'd be like, what is this? And, they were like, yeah, it's this crazy racist shit, basically. So I was like, okay, well, and so then it got taught at university much later. And I was like, I get it. I mean, I'm not one to censor stuff, or people these days. A lot of people go to cancel culture mode, like hit the cancel button on anything. And for me, at least, I was like, okay, this is some twisted, crazy stuff. What makes it tick? Well, I'd rather take it apart and understand it than just immediately push it aside. So that I'd say I first checked it out and heard about it when I was maybe 16, 17. And I thought it was a joke because it seemed like ridiculous. Like it was, you could tell immediately it was white people in blackface, like a minstrel thing, a reverse minstrel show. And the music was corny, like Southern sounding, like, like you're at a ragtime bar or something. But the music was based on Wagner, but with this Southern flip of the music. And so nothing really made me take it that serious until you realize, okay, wait a second. So they still think, I remember when Hillary Clinton did the whole hyper predators thing, and that was, and don't forget Biden did the whole, I voted for Biden. I like Biden. He's cool on certain things. But back in the day, the 3 strikes and you're out, federal incarceration issues really increased the incarcerated population dramatically. There's a lot of statistics to show that. So you could hear, the film as a joke or see it as just some sort of absurd thing, but then you look around and you're like, well, it's still kind of, it's still resonant, which, so yeah.
I want to chime in real quick. I think the first time I ever saw any footage of it was a Public Enemy video, maybe Hazy Shade of Criminal or something. Like I just remember them using that imagery in the early 90s. And then what's an interesting thing to tie back into, Paul, you wanted to remix this or, make new messaging of it. Locally here in Houston, not far from Houston, Pasadena, Texas, which is right on the outskirts. There was a local, the Ku Klux Klan was huge. They had a office or whatever you want to say, station in Pasadena, which is also the home of Urban Cowboy, where that was filmed, just to give you some context. But there was a record label called Johnny Rebel out of Pasadena that put out a lot of propaganda, supporting the Ku Klux Klan. And then there's an interview with Mike Dean, a producer that grew up around here, saying when he was a teenager, he would sample it, but with the intentions, because this is in the early times of Public Enemy, X-Clan, like those types of groups who are making this sort of pro-Black music, to take some of those sound bites or some of that music and flip it to be used in a positive manner, or at least an educational manner. Like I see the parallels to what you've done with Birth of a Nation, with what certain hip hop groups over time have done, using that imagery and certain things as an educational tool.
Yeah, I think.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead, Erika.
No, I was just going to say, and I think that's what's so fascinating about the project for me, because I look at myself, and I'm a particular age. Birth of a Nation was just kind of that reference point of racist propaganda, turn of the century. That's the message. Not really engaging the film to watch it full on, but it was like, this is that that kind of sort of the hallmark of that Jim Crow coming out of post-Reconstruct, like that, the starting point of that kind of racism in our country. And the fact, Jason Flash, that you make that same point about it being that sort of, the thing that everyone kind of uses as that illustration, carrying that on through a tradition now, young people today will see this film and it's serving that same purpose. I just find that really interesting, particularly given what all has transpired as a country, as a community, all of the things that have happened, that it still kind of is serving that purpose. I just find that really interesting.
Well, and Erika, also one of the things, and Flash, this is something that goes back to your saying Public Enemy, X-Clan. I think it was Public Enemy did Burn Hollywood Burn, and that was the one that had the
yes.
They were doing this whole critique of Hollywood stereotypes.
Right, yeah.
And the color line, I mean, Erika, this is something. I mean, there was a whole bunch of Black theoreticians like Booker T. Washington, who was like, wait, maybe we should actually just let white people do their thing, and we're going to do our thing over here. And that became one of the major themes of the tension between him and Du Bois. Like, should we integrate or should we just do our thing? And right now, it's kind of fascinating because there's people like Tyler Perry. I have mixed feelings. His stuff, like, he's got Tyler Perry Studios. He's a billionaire now. His film Medea, one could argue plays on stereotypes. It's not the most enlightening film. I mean,
right.
But he's making money doing his thing based on a lot of stereotypes. I'm just reducing it down to that. I'm not against or for. It's not my flavor. I like more crazier art or science fiction or like wilder stuff. But so race films used to do a similar thing because the color line made African Americans have to do their own thing. And one could argue when there was more of an integration of cinema later, a lot of Black directors got wiped out until the late 60s with Gordon Parks and blaxploitation and stuff like that. So these are questions that linger. I mean, is it okay to integrate? Is it better to do your own thing and just separate or whatever? These are questions I just want to have as provocations and get people to, like I said, critical thinking, like, argue both pro and con. Why not? And that's where I think filmmakers like Jordan Peele or Boots Riley are doing, is that they're giving us these kind of very rich. I'm a big fan of Julie Dash. She did the film Daughters of the Dust a long time ago. So these are much more complex and Charles Burnett is brilliant. He did a film Killer of Sheep, brilliant film. So let's add to the canon. I mean, the good news is that the future is much bigger than the past, and we got plenty of time ahead of us to try and evolve and make a different world. So let's get started.
Absolutely, yeah,
definitely. Yes, I'm just sitting with all of this amazing conversation and thoughts from all of you. I really appreciate it. I think one of the things that has really struck me in this conversation is just how this theme of the arts being that tool for self-reflection, critical thinking, development, moving our society forward is just so important to keep in mind, and reinforces the value of all the work that we're doing on this. So I want to thank all of you for joining me today. I'll let you all close if you have anything last that you'd like to share.
Oh, I mean, it's been a great conversation. A lot of things that you covered. So hey, please continue to push the boundaries of creativity. It's definitely needed. And as an artist, I'm sure you agree.
Oh, absolutely. And this is just the beginning of a conversation. Personally, Flash, I'm very intrigued about Texas is going to be one of these kind of interesting zones because so many people are leaving urban. New York has lost 2 or 3 million people.
Oh, yeah.
I'm moving to Colorado.
Okay.
I think a lot of these southern states are going to be changing because people are going to be moving from the cities out to the countryside. And in a healthy way, you'll have like a gluten-free avocado sandwich in the middle of like some Southerns, remote. I don't know.
Right.
Yeah,
well, Houston's full. Don't come here.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
no, I think most Houstonians feel that way just because it's becoming overcrowded very quickly. But
Right.
Texas has a lot of room. There's a lot of space.
Right.
Elsewhere.
Texas in general, yeah, for sure.
Right.
Definitely. Thanks so much, Paul. It's wonderful. Erika, any last words?
This is amazing. I'm just super encouraged, and I and motivated to explore some of the themes further. And I'm just reminded that we have so many young people that are watching this, and what this will do for their conversations as they kind of branch out and go into the world. And so I'm just really grateful that we were able to do this. And thank you, Claire, again, for all of your hard work. It's been a tremendous conversation.
Yes. Thank you again to Erika and the Gregory School for their partnership on this program. And also a huge thank you to our partners at Emancipation Park Conservancy and the Houston Metropolitan Research Center for helping us spread the word about this program and this particular event. Thank you again to DJ Spooky and DJ Flash Gordon Parks for this amazing, insightful conversation, and also for allowing our audience to experience this exchange of ideas and to get to know both of you better. Society for the Performing Arts is a nonprofit organization. If you enjoyed this conversation, please consider learning more about what we do at SPA and supporting our work and the work of our exceptional artists that we bring to Houston, like DJ Spooky. Our website is spahouston.org. Thanks, everyone. Good night.
All right.